All right, so we're going to start chapter 5. And what book are we reading?
Seas Behind Trees.
Very good. Okay, so the last chapter, what'd you think about when he got stuck in the water?
That was pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was pretty creepy. And like Ethan said, it felt like you had, what'd you say, you had to check your toes?
Yeah.
That kind of cracked me up. Okay, so we're starting chapter 5 and we're all on page 47. Please follow along with me. All right. I was nearly asleep in my house that night when I heard voices outside mention my name. Do you know where Greyfire is taking Seas Behind Trees? My mother whispered. I know where he wants to go. I recognized Werewolf's voice. She sounded uncomfortable, as if she really didn't wish to talk. What do you mean, Otter? My mother asked. It's a place he dreams about, the werewolf answered. He's tried to find it many times, but with no success. This won't be any different. She did not sound convinced. Is it dangerous? Should I worry? Greyfire knows the forest better than anyone. He'll teach Seas Behind Trees a great deal. Nothing bad will happen. Greyfire always returns eventually from these wanderings, tired and disappointed, but no worse than that. Have others accompanied him before? There is a brief silence. No, the werewolf admitted. Seas Behind Trees will be the first. Neither of them spoke for such a long space that I almost drifted into sleep again, but then the werewolf said something that made me completely alert. If I could stop my brother, I would, but I think he has waited for this long enough. It is time to go, and her words seemed forced from her, like the meat of corn squeezed out of one kernel after another. This time, I must allow him. That's quite a piece of figurative language there. What kind of figurative language is that? Her words seem forced from her like the meat of corn. How do we know that? Like. Isn't that weird? It's a strange simile. Her words seem forced from her like the meat of corn squeezed out of. That's strange. You know, sometimes when your parents are telling you a story and they slow every word that comes out of their mouth, and you're like, say it, just say it. Have you ever experienced that? Sometimes your grandparents might be telling you a story like that. But what about Walnut? I mean, Seas Behind Trees. There's more to this than you're telling me, Otter. My mother was alarmed. I could see her face in my mind, her eyebrows drawn together, her eyes glistening, her lips drawn back across her teeth. What will happen to Seas Behind Trees will be up to him, the werewolf answered. As it is, finally, for each of us. Where is Greyfire taking you? Brings the Deer and I stood together in front of my house in the crisp early morning light. He was annoyed and something more. I promised him I wouldn't tell. I pulled a deerskin robe closer around my chest. The air smelled of winter, sharp and silver. But I'm your uncle. I could join you. Greyfire is a hard man to know, and this would be a good chance for me. There is much I could learn from him. Besides, he's old to make a difficult trip as cold weather approaches. What would you do if he got sick or hurt himself? Brings the Deer inclined himself toward me and showed me the expression on his face. It reminded me a look I had seen before, but only on very young children who didn't want to sleep. I drew lines with my moccasin in the soft, cold ashes of last night's cooking fire. I'd never before been in this situation, where Brings the Deer wanted something from me, and I was embarrassed that I could not grant his request. I'm sorry, I said. He stepped back, made a noise of irritation. Why did he choose you? He asked, but he meant, why not me? It's just that, and there was nothing I could do, nothing I could explain without revealing Greyfire's private story. It's just that Greyfire wants to figure out how I heard him walking in the woods. He said it was a useful skill. Then he should ask your mother, Brings the Deer replied. But I could sense that he didn't feel as badly now that he had a reason to rest upon that had nothing to do with some failure of his own. And after a moment, while we both watched our breath make clouds in the air, he turned back into his normal self. How long do you think you'll be gone? Maybe, I remember Greyfire had said, the journey home from the land of water had taken 2 days, but of course we had to find it first. Maybe 5 days? Oh, then you must prepare yourself, Brings the Deer said, and he ducked into the house, and I could hear him talking softly to my father, who was of two minds about my leaving, worried I was too young and proud that his son had been selected to accompany such an important man on a long trip. Their muted voices sounded like bubbles of steam on the surface of a boiling pot. Another great piece of figurative language there. Terrific descriptions that help you visualize, make the story come into a movie in your mind. In a moment, they both joined me outside. Brings the Deer draped his new cape woven tightly from reeds around my shoulders. My father placed a small bundle into my hands and then kept his own large hands around mine while he spoke to me. You may need food. This time of year, you never know what to expect. I packed some flints, a shell knife, a strong coiled rope of grapevine. He hesitated. Ashes from a cooking fire, he added gruffly, to remind you where you live. His hands were gentle, warm in the cold air, and they trembled slightly before he let me go. This is a great honor, he said, and then he added, I will fast until you return home. Now, do you know what the word fast means in this way?
Wait, maybe?
Okay, that's a good guess. Fast, because it doesn't mean fast in the general sense, like you run fast across the field. I will fast until you get home. What do you think, Mayline? What does fast mean here? I will fast until you get home.
Maybe like cherish?
Good guess, good using context clues. Think about fast in the sense of the fasting season. Like right now we're approaching Easter and the 40 days of fasting, the 40 days of Lent. Does anyone celebrate Lent? Does anyone fast, like give up like a certain food? Does anyone think about how Jesus fasted for 40 days? Does anyone talk about that at home? Well, fasting means like to go without a food, like as a sacrifice in honor of something. So he's going to fast. He's going to go without a food, to like have less food as a sacrifice, like an honor and like a prayer for his son. Okay, so it's fasting, to have less food. Does that make sense? And that's what fast means here. It's like a religious thing. And by the time I got to Greyfire's house, it had begun to snow. The flakes struck my skin like a swarm of gnats. When I reached to touch my hair, I found my head covered with a crusty cap that cracked and broke apart at my brushing. Excuse me. Surely, I told myself nervously, Greyfire will want to wait for a better day. But no, he was impatient to start out. It's too early for real snow, he stated. This won't last. It will melt in no time, and by this evening, the earth will be brown again. Greyfire was not a tall man, and he was slightly bent with age. So he and I were nearly the same height. He wasn't as old as grandfather. He was as old as grandfather, but his mind seemed younger, more curious, and less sure. His oiled black hair was streaked with white, and his face was brown and round as a chestnut. He clutched his rabbit cloak with a hand shaped by hard work, knobby fingers scarred by blades of many hunting knives. Hopefully you're visualizing all of these great descriptions, boys and girls. And I sometimes compare this to like grandparents' hands. Like their knobby fingers, their knuckles kind of protruding in between their rough and knobby and gnarled. Knobby fingers scarred by the blades of many hunting knives, nails cracked, wrinkles that slid over the muscles and bones. He smelled of smoke and venison. What is venison?
Dried meat.
Dried meat? What kind of meat? Does anyone remember from your other books, Blood on the River, My Brother's
Deer meat.
Good, very good, Ethan. And damp fur. And when he smiled to encourage me, many teeth were missing from their places. He had picked me out from all of the others. There was nowhere I wouldn't go with him. How will we find it? I asked as we passed through the wall of black trees at the back of the village. What should I do? First, Greyfire said, I'll bring you to the closest spot I remember, and then you'll listen and see what you hear. And once we were in the room of the forest, I forgot about the snow. There was very little wind, and the trees acted as a roof to protect us. The floor was gentle with the leaves of dry pine. We traveled swiftly and without further conversation. Every now and then, Greyfire would hesitate, press his palm against the flat of a rock, and study a pattern of bark before turning right or left. Will you show me how to do that? I asked him. How to find your way around out here? I put my hand on a tree trunk as he had touched. It was soft and mossy. Your body will remember where it has been if you let it, he answered. It recalls what's familiar, but not as your mind does. Not with your mind, you stand outside. With your mind, you stand outside the world and look in. But with your body, you are inside already. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I nodded anyway. Do you understand? Greyfire asked. No, I told him honestly. Then don't nod your head, he advised. If you don't admit your confusion, you'll never learn anything that you don't already know. Greyfire balanced his words by raising his eyebrows and pursing his lips, as though he were the one receiving an unwelcome criticism, not me. Let me try again, because this is easier than it sounds. When rain falls into a river, how does it know which way to flow? When a mouse leaves its hole, how does it ever get back? When a bird flies away for the winter, how does it locate its nest when it returns to the spring? They're smart? I tried. Smarter than you? Greyfire inquired. I thought of a mouse. I thought of a bird. I thought of a drop of rain. No, I said. Yes, they are, exclaimed Greyfire, and poked at my ribs with a pointy finger, because they know not to think. If a mouse ever began to consider the situation, it would be very unhappy. Why? I tried to imagine a thoughtful mouse. Greyfire was right. It did not look happy. All right, Greyfire continued, and stuck his face close to mine. I'm a mouse. Somehow his eyes sparkled and his nose became longer and his arms shorter, and he drew his chin in to his neck and he glanced around in every direction. I couldn't help laughing out loud. What is that noise? What is that awful noise? Greyfire crowed in a mouse voice. It was like thunder, but smaller. Help! I must run. But where? I'm so little and everything else is so big. What should I do? I don't know! All the while he was being a mouse, Greyfire hopped up and down in worry. Be a bird now, I begged. Greyfire's body changed. He stuck out his neck. He inspected the ground with one eye. He extended his arms to either side. Oh, yes, here I am, high in the sky, he chirped. Nothing but clouds below me. Let me think. Where did I leave my eggs? Was it in a tree? Or that tree? Or was it in that tree over there? I'm concentrating, but they all look the same to me. I am lost. And when winter comes, which direction do I fly? Where do I go? And with that, he flapped his arms desperately, and he opened and closed his mouth. It was so amazing to see such a dignified man behave like one of my friends, though Greyfire was funnier than anybody my age. As a matter of fact, he seemed like someone my age, as if he had never become completely a grown-up. Now, Rain, I pleaded, trying to hold in my laughter. If you lost your place, I'm in the middle of page 54.
Your turn.
Yeah, I just didn't know if Addie lost her place. Your turn. He folded his arms and he watched me. I don't know how. Yes, you do. Rain. I put my arms close to my side of my body and I turned myself into a straight line. I shut my eyes and I pictured myself narrow as a stem. I like to fall, I sang, surprising myself, and I clicked my tongue. And suddenly, I was rain. I remembered what it felt like to leap from the high rocks of the overhung, the lake of north of the village, to sail so fast through the air. At once you pushed off, there was no more chance to be scared, to have nothing but wind touch your body until the shock of the cold water. There was no time in it. No this, then this, then this. Just that thrill of no control, of passing through the world so fast, loving the fear, loving the not knowing, loving that you were daring enough to have jumped in the first place. I opened my eyes and Greyfire was watching me and smiling. Very good, he complimented me. Now be a raindrop that thinks. Ooh, I thought about thinking, and immediately I became worried. Oh no, I cried, I'm falling, catch me, I'm so far. When I wasn't inside a raindrop, when I stood outside myself and I thought about all the terrible things that could happen and everything changed, I shut my eyes and I yelled. When I stopped, the forest was very quiet and the only sound was the whispering swish of the distant snow. And after a moment, Greyfire spoke. Now, he said in his regular voice, now you can nod. Do you understand what Greyfire is trying to teach Seas? What is, you said, so now let's see if you know. What is Greyfire trying to teach Seas? To use his what?
His mind.
You think to use his mind? To use more his body. The word is kind of like what animals use. Animals don't use their mind. Animals do things by their what? Starts with their what? They do things by themselves, but if they do things, it starts with the I. It is independently. But do they get up in the morning and the squirrels think, I'm going to get up today and gather acorns. I'm going to go out and make my nest more sturdy for the winter time.
Yes.
I'm going to go store my collection of nuts. Do they think these things? They do all of these things by instinct. Yes. And so Greyfire is trying to teach Seas to have this natural instinct, to follow his instinct more. That we have a natural instinct if we learn to trust our instinct, right? That we do have that, and to trust in ourselves. Sometimes don't you get these nagging feelings like something might not be safe? Don't do that, that's not safe. Be careful of that. There's like little warning signs that go off, to trust in our instinct. And that's what Greyfire is trying to teach them, right? Okay, all right, that's it for today. I know I've